Okay, can I just welcome everyone to this, what I call an important session. And the title for this is
Please.
An Audience with Professor Dawn Edge, Mental Health Strategies in Difficult Times. So my name is Clive Saunders, and I'm the chair of the Watford African Caribbean Association. And this evening is part of our a program of Black History Month activities.
Mm.
Um, Last week, we had a superb session looking at diabetes with Dr. Joan St. John and Evelyn Mensah, ND. It's still available on our YouTube channel, and what we'll do is we'll put a link in there if you'd like to watch it and to share it. And next week, we have actually got another session where the focus will be on stroke. You'll see what kind of connects these things is that these are matters that are important to people in our community. And those of you know me that know that when I talk about our community in this case, we are primarily talking about people of African origin. Um, so I'd like to just at the outset just thank our Black History Month team who have helped to put this program together. And they'll also be helping out tonight. I think you'll see that there's Marilyn and Marcia who is on this call too. In the context of tonight, though, I hope you agree with me that there can't be many of us nowadays who aren't conscious of the mental health issues around us and some of the challenges that presents in us trying seeking to deal with that. Some research that I've seen suggests that there's up to 1 in 4 of us from our community who is impacted by mental ill health. And of course, the associated inequity that comes with that. I'm sure, like me, many of you here may know people amongst family and friends who have been impacted and are impacted by this. I can't pretend to know very much about this topic, although I myself have that experience in my own family. You'll be pleased to know, and I'm very pleased to say, that tonight we have one of the most eminent professionals who has spent years looking into these issues who will be addressing us tonight. She's no other than Professor Dawn Edge. I met Dawn a few years ago, and I was immediately impressed. Ever since then, I've been trying to find a time and space for her to address us, and I couldn't be more pleased when she agreed that she'd join us tonight. As you all will probably know, that BHM theme, the Black History Month theme for this year is reclaiming narratives, and it is therefore particularly opportune in my view that we've got Dawn who will be speaking to us shortly. Before I hand over to her, let me just say a few words of introduction about who she is, just in case you're somebody who's not come across her before. Dawn is Professor of Mental Health and Inclusivity at the University of Manchester. She is also the academic lead for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion on race, religion and belief. So she's a particularly appropriate person to be talking to us because of that kind of background. In 2019, she became the University of Manchester's first Black woman professor. And we have to applaud her for that, amongst other things. She's also a member of the Board of Governors at the Health Foundation and director of the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Research Unit within Greater Manchester Mental Health NHS Trust. She has previously served as a non-executive director of NHS Mental Health Trust, on the board of trustees of community organized and on the board of trustees of community organizations that work with marginalized communities. As a health service researcher, Dawn works collaboratively with service users, their families, community members, and others to ensure that our work influences policy and practice. Dawn intentionally creates opportunities for people from racialized and other marginalized groups to partner in co-creating more equitable and accessible care, treatment, and outcomes in mental health care. At the heart of this endeavor is Dawn's passion for inclusive research, creating research and academic roles and environments in which people from diverse backgrounds can thrive. I'm sure you will agree with me that is a real privilege to have Dawn address us. Um, as I said a bit early on before we started recording, uh, do use the chat as we go through the evening. And before you do leave the session, as some of you may well need to do before the end, we'd welcome any feedback you have on the evening and any suggestion that you might have as to how we might improve. As indicated, the session is being recorded, and if you are not already on our contact list and would like to receive a copy, please leave your name and email address in the chat in due course. I think you've probably heard more than enough from me already. So unless there are any questions at this particular point in time, I'm going to hand over to Professor Dawn Hedge. Can I just check, are there any questions for us to
No, no, what you can see in the chat is just me sharing the various links and reminding people to put their questions in, or they can raise their hand when we get to Q&A, but we're good to start.
Thank you, Marilyn. So, having said that, I'm going to just welcome again Professor Dawn Hedge. Dawn, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Clive, and thank you everyone for being here. I recognize some of the New Testament Church of God folk. So it's really, really great to have your support. And Karen Carberry, as I'm sure Karen's name may come up at another point. And all of you, I'm just really delighted to be here. I should say that what I really want to do, so Clive called us an audience with, but I'd really like this to be a conversation with. So I'm going to share some thoughts, but then what I really want is for us to talk about stuff, because I actually think that when we're talking about strategies for managing our mental health and well-being, there are lots that people on here can share. So let me share some slides. Slideshow from the beginning. Okay, can you see that? All right.
Yes, we can.
Can you see the whole slide, or can you just see the notes as well?
We can see the notes as well. So
okay, so we don't want that. So let me see from the beginning. Oh, that's a bit odd. Why is that so? I have no idea why it's doing that. From the beginning.
It's from current slide. If you go from current slide, it should change it.
Yeah, it should do, but it's not doing.
Hmm.
I don't really want to see my notes. That's not much good to you, is it?
No, I think.
No, let me just come down here and do it this way. Oh, lost you all together now, haven't
I? Yes, you're no longer.
Okay. Let me try again. Let me try doing it again. You see the technology?
Yes.
It's marvelous when it works.
It worked earlier on.
It did. It worked perfectly fine earlier on. So let's try again. And if push comes to shove, we just go with the outline view, because that's not what I want. So, and it should.
Sometimes the slideshow, but the bottom of the screen. Sometimes.
Yeah, I did that also, but it's not. When I do that one, it goes off altogether. That's what happened before.
It might come. Sometimes it's.
No idea why. So yeah, that's just going to. All right, let's see. Oops.
Oh, that's fine now. So, that was fine just now. Just need to go back to the beginning.
Honestly, this is my day job. Wouldn't you think that it would be easy?
And someone was saying, because there's another slideshow in the top, so it's got file, home, insert, animations, and someone's saying perhaps give that slideshow a go as well. But I feel you, sometimes Zoom does this to me.
It's just
It's weird.
ridiculous. Let me close everything else down. Oh, for goodness sake. Well, it's a good job we've got a bit of time, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
It just builds up the anticipation. I've
Yeah,
seen a little
yeah,
glimpse of those
absolutely.
slides now, and I'm
this
like,
is,
oh, it's looking
sh-
good. I'm excited.
shall I say it's deliberate? I wish I could. Tell you what I'm going to do. I'm just going to go into the slides for a moment and just make sure there's nothing there.
And just so people know, we did actually test it out in
We
advance.
did. That's the irony. So I'm going to close down the version that I had open, and I'm going to open it up differently and see whether that helps. Because I have no idea why it would do that. That is the strangest thing. Right, let's try opening it up again and see if it works this time.
Just so the people who are asking the question in the chat about the presentation, we are recording everything. So in fact, you will receive the presentation with the recording. Quite often what we find when there are these type of sessions, the size of the file makes it very difficult to actually share the individual slides. We will do that.
Okay, so I'm going to give it one more go, and if it doesn't work like this, then we'll just go with what we've got. Okay. Say your prayers, people. So from the beginning.
Yeah. Yes. Success.
Yes, the old turn it off and turn it back on again works every time. Okay, so it is a pleasure to be here, as Clive has already said. So this is some of the titles that are quite along my life journey. And I'm just going to just go straight in because in the interest of time, and just say a little bit about me. So this photograph was taken in June of this year, a very belated inaugural lecture. So for those who don't know, when you become a professor, you have what they call an inaugural lecture. And it's a way of kind of saying that, announcing that you've arrived, as it were, at the top of the academic totem pole. And it's an opportunity for you to share your work with your peers and students and the wider academic community. Well, I decided that I was going to have an inaugural with a difference. And so you can't see all the colors, but there's some yellow in that top that I'm wearing. So I wore my Jamaica colors, and we made sure we had all kinds. We had singing, and it's part of the inaugural. We had rum punch and what's they call them? Oxtail and butterbean bites and ackee quiche and all sorts for the menu. So it was different. But this actually is not atypical. So you can see either side of me two white men. And as Clive said, I became in 2019 the first ever Black woman professor at the University of Manchester. And that is in 200 years. So this photograph was taken at the start of Universally Manchester. It was a festival to celebrate the university's bicentenary. And I was delighted to give my inaugural there. And I tell you, it was a rocking event. I'm happy to share more about that after, but hey. And it's interesting that I should be the first Black woman because some of you will know this guy. Some of you will be familiar with him. If you are from or have traveled or studied in the Caribbean, you'll know there are SALISEs, the Sir Arthur Lewis Institutes of Economic Sciences all over. There's definitely one at Mona campus at Jamaica. There's one at Cave Hill in Barbados that I've visited. There's one in Grenada. There's one in Trinidad. And this is the gentleman who in 1948 became the UK's first ever Black professor. And this guy was no academic slouch. Look, he was 33 when he became a professor. I was a bit older than that. Anyway, and he returned to the Caribbean in 1959 to become he became vice chancellor at the University of the West Indies. And he also was the first Black man to become a Nobel laureate for economics. But he also did some pretty hidden, to talk about hidden history. So in Manchester, he set up programs around education and financial literacy. And that still, there's a West Indian sports and social club in Manchester that he founded as a place where people could congregate and advance their learning. So he was a pretty remarkable person. So to be following in his shoes all those years was something else. But what was really interesting is that nobody knew about this guy. Nobody knew about him until maybe about 10 years ago, when somebody unearthed him, and then we named a building after him and so on. And so I am determined that people are going to know a bit about me when I'm still alive. So that's my plan. Anyway, so my journey to becoming the professor of mental health starts here. So you can see little Jamaica there, nestling under Cuba, with big Haiti and Dominica over here, and here's Mexico. So so most of you on here will know, but just in case people don't. And I am not from Kingston, like most people from Jamaica would tell you they're from Kingston. No, I'm a proud St. Catherine girl. And I took the trip, aged 11, to come and join my parents here. So I'll just show you where Manchester is, because it's, we're part of the, for those of you who are down south, there's not much that exists north of Watford. So that's Manchester. We're part of what is now Greater Manchester conurbation. So here's me, aged 11. So you can see, it says at the bottom here, you can see the print of my passport. And I know I was super cute, but true, for real, for real. So this is me, handed over to stewardess on the plane, and made that journey on my own, aged 11, to join my parents. So there's my mum, Miss Esmin O'Connor, and my dad, so Esmin O'Connor and he was Percival Monroe. Yeah, both gone. But they, like so many people before them, came to the UK in search of a better future for their children, left me and my siblings, except one. I have a sister that was born in the UK, but the rest of us were left in Jamaica with grandparents. And that's a whole other story that I'm sure we may touch on later on. So I arrived in October of whichever year it was. And I don't know. I have never lost my fascination for snow. So this was not me, by the way. It's just a photograph of snow. And I just remember just being absolutely mesmerized as I saw this thing falling from the sky. But actually, it wasn't that long before the cold of that landscape, I recognized that it matched the coldness of a lot of the people, not everybody. And that, having left Jamaica, so I had a Jamaican passport, but my parents saw themselves as British, as many Jamaicans of their age, but very quickly, it became very clear to me that there ain't no black in the Union Jack. So people like me, who had a legitimate claim to be British, even though I had a Jamaican passport, and also people who were born here, who were Black British, literally born in the UK, are still not really recognized as full citizens. And so that quite early age, that sheer injustice, and watching my parents, like so many other people of their era, struggle. So my mum had a really good friend who was a white woman, and her daughter was the same age as my younger sister, so we used to play together. But my mum used to earn half the wages of this white friend, not because she didn't work as hard. In fact, she worked much harder. But the system was set up so that the black staff, the black workers, could never earn what their white contemporaries did. And all of that injustice just kept festering in my spirit. It just, when you've got, those of us who've had children and grandchildren, when the 3-year-old says, "It's not fair," well, I still have that 3-year-old inside that says, "It's just not fair," and what we're going to do about it. And so in a lot of my experiences, like I'm sure many people on this call, of being othered, the point at which you realize that you weren't going to be invited to the birthday parties, or I was a sailor Harry, I was an athlete, and that there were certain. It got to a point where people were doing boyfriend girlfriend thing, and it became really clear that some of that was not going to happen, and all of that. The painful experiences of being othered, being seen as being an outsider, of being told, like I guess, again, many of us on here, that you have to work twice as hard and find that even then your efforts are not valued, not validated, not recognized. So turning all of that passion, sometimes anger, and finding my purpose in the pain became and still is my life's work. So this is me on the front row, never a back row girl, front row. And this is me training to become a physio. So when I was in Jamaica, I was a grammar school girl. I passed my 11 plus. My parents, unfortunately, didn't understand the system well enough to know that my 11 plus in Jamaica had currency in the UK. So I went to a regular comprehensive, went partway through the year. As I said, I arrived by kind of around half term. And that culture shock and trying to catch up was really challenging. So in Jamaica, I knew from an early age that I wanted to be a doctor. But that wasn't going to happen because I frankly didn't get the grades. So I became a physio, and it was a good one. But then I started to see and hear people talking about postnatal depression. So this is the point at which I'd moved on from being a physio to being a physio lecturer, first and only. The people that look like me in the physio school. And I should say that when I did my work experience at school and said I wanted to be a physio, I was sent off to one of the hospitals, and the head of physiotherapy called me to her office and suggested that I might consider a different profession. Because it was jolly hard to get in, jolly hard. And so it was years later that I was standing at the university, not Manchester, a different university, as a lecturer, teaching physiotherapists, teaching students how to become physiotherapists, and going back to that same hospital to oversee the students on training, to deliver training to the staff who were working with our students. And I remembered that conversation I'd had with her all those years ago. And like many of us, if you took no for an answer the whole time that you heard it, you wouldn't do anything, right? Anyway, I kind of fast forward many years, and I decided that I wanted to do higher qualification, because physiotherapy was an all-graduate profession at that stage, and my students were coming back a couple of years later asking for their transcripts because they wanted to do masters and PhDs, and I had a first degree, and I was like, oh, okay. So if I'm going to have an academic career, I'm going to need more than just a first degree. And I wanted to do something. I decided at that point that if I was going to do a PhD, which I decided that's what I wanted to do, it needed to be something that was going to make a difference. And there was a lot of stuff in the press at the time about postnatal depression. And I wanted to know, how come I didn't know any Black woman that talked about having postnatal depression, or indeed any form of depression? And that question turned into my PhD, and these are some of the papers that I wrote from that PhD. And this one is one of the ones that I'm really, really proud that it got published. So you can see the first bit of it is, "Why art thou cast down, O my soul?" And it was a paper looking at how Black people, and in this case, Black women in particular, harness spirituality, their faith, and their identity as means of dealing with depression. And that was another thing. That was this dealing with it was a line from an interview I did with a very young Black woman who would, when I was doing my PhD work, which is around perinatal depression, and I was asking her how she was coping because she'd had a lot of things happen to her, and she said, "I just deal with it every day. Every day, I just get up and I just deal with it." And that's what many of us do. Anyway, moving on. I then moved on to decide to look at psychosis and schizophrenia, partly because I wanted to do more work with Black women, actually, but I couldn't get the funding. Nobody was really interested in funding research into sad Black women, not least because we do deal with it and we do get up and we do keep going to work even when we're depressed. And so a lot of it is hidden. And we know we're still in church, we're depressed, and we're still women's ministries president, or we're singing on the choir, or we're running Sunday school, we're doing all of these things, and we're looking after our family, but we're still depressed. And then one day I kind of heard myself saying, well, if I wanted to really get on in doing research into Black mental health, I'd do some stuff around schizophrenia, because some of you will be very familiar with this kind of the schizophrenia epidemic. So basically, if you're in the UK, your risk of being diagnosed with schizophrenia in particular, psychosis more generally, but schizophrenia in particular, if you're Caribbean, your risk is about 7 times, so that's 6.7. Your relative risk is about almost 7 times as great as being a white British person. And for African, it's about 4 times. And alongside that, we have all the stuff that I'm sure many of you, again, were familiar with. So we're much more likely to come into mental health services under mental health section, involving the police rather than through the GP. Once we're in hospital, we're much more likely to have what's called coercive care. So that's being treated in isolation, having a lot of control and restraint techniques, from which a disproportionate number of Black service users, patients will die. Lack of access to psychological therapies, and those that do exist are not culturally informed. And maybe not surprisingly, we have worse outcomes, including on average, our stay as inpatients on psychiatric wards is about 2.5 times longer than a white British person. And then even when we're discharged, we're much more likely to be put on community care, community treatment orders, which mean that we can be brought back at any time on the license. And yet we are often labeled hard to reach. And really, rather than seeing that as, why would you want to engage with a system that is going to treat you in that way? Or why would you want, as a parent with your young person, starts to hear voices or behave in ways that everybody thinks is a bit odd? Why would you want to engage in with that system when the outcome is not likely to be good? So we can talk about that. And some of those disparities also across the lifespan. So we're talking specifically around mental health. So in children, of those who receive autism diagnoses, about 60% come from what are described as socially disadvantaged background. And really, they usually mean socioeconomically disadvantaged, because often people aren't socially disadvantaged. They may be poor, but that doesn't mean that they're socially disadvantaged at all. And about just over a third are less likely to have English as their first language. And amongst those, Black and multiracial, biracial children and young people account for about 5%. So CAMS is child and adolescent mental health services. So bearing in mind what I said about, the rate at which adults are being sectioned and so on, about 5% of all children and young people with mental health problems are from Black or multiracial background. But more than a third of them are being detained in the highest levels of security. Not just a third of them, but a third of all the young people in mental health services who are detained at the high levels of security are Black and mixed or multiple heritage. And if you go to the other end, people with dementia, so Black people, we've got almost a quarter higher incidence of being of dementia. And we know that the evidence suggests that we get onset much sooner, about 10 years sooner, partly because we have much higher risk of vascular dementia through things like high blood pressure and diabetes and those things. And we're much less likely to get an early diagnosis. And because we get diagnosed later, and many of us don't even get a diagnosis, the treatments that we're offered then are much less effective in terms of medication. But this isn't the case for all people of color. So if you think about South Asian people, they're much less likely to be diagnosed with dementia. But within those groups, what we'll know is that there's difference between whether you're Bangladeshi or Pakistani or Indian, just as you've seen with the on the previous slide, there are differences between being Caribbean and African, but we're often lumped together as one group, Black, and another group, South Asian, and another group, East Asian, rather than looking at the differences within those groups. And that really highlights, the failure to kind of do that really nuanced research on which what is called evidence-based practice. So a lot of the work, the treatments that people receive, as we saw with during the pandemic, there was a lot of skepticism because the drugs are trialed, including things like those that people use for dementia. We're not involved in those clinical trials. We're not involved in that research, but it's still seen as evidence-based practice and it's rolled out to everybody. I'm just going to do a little bit of a detour back to where I started to talk about Black women in academia, because whilst I'm talking about academia, this could be Black women in corporate services, in the NHS. It's pretty much, you see what I mean. So I'd already mentioned that when I became a professor, I was first and only. There are now 2 of us at the University of Manchester. Wow. So these are our figures. So you'll see that from 950 professors, at one point I was the only one that was a Black female. There were just like 6 Black men, and actually there are 5 now because one's just retired. Reader is the stage before that, so you can see there's less. That little symbol means less than 5. So usually they don't tell you how many, because it's, especially when it's just one person, it's often easy to work out who that is. So it's just a convention of how things are reported. But you'll see, so the grand total here, there are 5,000. Over 5,000 academics at my university. Of all of those, Black women are 40 and Black men are 55. So there are not many of us. And you'll see there are groups where there are none. So people who are doing, it was senior research fellows. So these are the gaps where there are not people here following behind. So this is why I'm so intent on getting people to follow behind, because there are these gaps, people are not there. And sometimes what they do, some of you will know some of the Black males at our university because they've been recruited from elsewhere. So many of you know David Olusoga, who does a lot of the Black history on TV, Gary Young from The Guardian. So they're 2 of our Black professors, Black male professors. These are not people who've kind of, did what I did, PhD, lecturer, climb to become professor, and then teaching other students. And what I found was that, as on my journey, I would literally turn up like this, looking all wonderful in my, think I'm going to play tennis, and other people have come to play a different game. And I just found that I just did not understand the rules of engagement. And not surprisingly, I was often left with my face down in the mud with somebody's studs in my back. And it's hard. It's hard. And so one of the things I'm absolutely committed to doing is using my lived experience to teach people about the rules of engagement and how to play the game. And there are some people I just wanted to acknowledge in here, because this is somebody called Professor Nicola Rollock. And Nicola is now a professor at KCL, so King's College London. And she did a piece of work looking at Black women in academia. And out of that work, she got some money and commissioned an exhibition of Black women in academia. And I was really proud and privileged to be one of those that featured in this this exhibition that she called Phenomenal Women, bearing in mind what it took to get to the top. But for every Nicola Rullock, for every Dawn Edge, there are these people who are casualties along the journey. And some of them we'll never know. Some of them drop out as PhD students. Some of them end up being ill and leaving. So some of you will know Claudine Gay. So this is a woman who's a Harvard professor. And so she was the first Black woman to hold a role as a vice chancellor. And she was accused of plagiarism. And eventually she was dismissed under a cloud. This is Tony Antoinette Candia-Bailey, a really, really popular administrator at her university, did great work to advance the careers and the interests of particularly of minoritized people of color. And she was accused, first of all, there were some issues around her being challenging somebody who had treated her very unfairly, white male. He then subsequently was exonerated. So she did, and even though there was quite strong evidence that she'd been bullied and treated really unfairly, he was exonerated, brought back into role. She was then disciplined, as often happens, and in the end, she took her own life. Well, we continue. We learn from those, we draw a breath, and we get up and we move on. And so this is what I'm saying. So this is part of the work that I'm involved in. So some of you will be aware of this. So there's, when I got my professorship, I think I was number 23 in the UK. And so this program is about trying to push the number. So the program launched in 2018, 19. I'm trying to think what year now. We're in the 4th cohort, so 2020, at which point there were 653, I think, and there are now 75 Black women professors in the whole of the UK. So that's all 4 countries. And so this is a program to actually change the system rather than change the people. So for those of you who have been on leadership programs or career development programs, very often there's a real strong emphasis on mentorship. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with mentorship, but the focus is then on fixing the people, to say, if you just had, a bit more mentorship and whatever else, then you'd be fine. This program explicitly sets out to change the system. And so it engages the very senior leaders in our organization. So she's now left. She left in July. So this was our former president and vice chancellor, Professor Dame Nancy Rothwell. And so this is the current cohort of 100 Black women professor alumni, and they get to meet with the vice chancellor personally in her office by themselves twice during their year on the program, but they also meet lots of other senior leaders. And importantly, they don't just get mentoring, they get coaching, and they have access to sponsorship, and as well as mentors whom they can choose. So I'm happy to talk a bit more about that. So at my university, I've led a program which is we've been awarded Race Equality Charter mark, a silver. So we're currently the only Russell group. So if you probably know, there's like the post-92 universities, some of them former polytechnics. And then there's what is called the Red Brick or the Russell Group universities, and Manchester's one of those. And there are only 3 universities in the country that have got a silver race equality charter. And we were the second to get one, and I was gutted that wasn't the first. But anyway, and we are the only Russell Group university to have a race equality charter. And the reason why I agreed to chair the race equality charter group was because going for a silver award meant that we had very specific actions about how we were going to shift the dial to achieve race equity. And one of the things that was fantastic was because I could write the application, but it has to be signed off by Nancy. And by the scene, she signs it off on behalf of the institution. And so I was able to write in it an organizational commitment to becoming an anti-discriminatory and an anti-racist organization. So she's put her name to that, as have the deans of the 3 faculties. So now we've got something to hold the institution to account against. So this brings me on to the next bit of what we're going to talk about, and how we preserve our mental health in difficult times. So I've just touched on some of the areas that we might want to go back and pick up on. So for example, I talked a little bit about autism. I think some of our children, particularly our boys, we're not picking up on what's happening for them early enough. So those who are what is now called neurodivergent, who might have autism, and it's not picked up, and then they are excluded for having difficult behavior. We know that racism plays a part in that also. And because so many of our children, and in particular the boys, are under constant surveillance in school, teachers are, female teachers are talking about being intimidated by them in their early adolescence, stop and search and so on. Not surprisingly, some of them develop symptoms of being paranoid, certainly being very anxious, but that's not picked up as anxiety. It's picked up then as aggression and treated very differently. So we're going to talk about that and about maybe how we can manage. So for me, one of the key things, and as I mentioned about passing on the baton to those behind, is knowing we have to know our values and our value. So I know that some of my key values are education and inclusivity, my faith, which underpins all of what I do. I see the work I do at university, just like as I saw the role of being Women's Ministries President, it's all about service. And knowing where you draw the line. What are the things that you won't compromise on? What are the things that would make me walk away from the University of Manchester and from my job and say, no, I'm not doing that? The importance of networks and allyship. You can't do any of this stuff on your own. And some of our allies, some of the thing is, certainly when we're talking about racism, we don't hold the power as a group, and certainly as predominantly Caribbean people, we're very small and getting and shrinking. So when you look at the census data, the Caribbean population, as in people would not see themselves as being Black, British, or mixed heritage. So we're talking about Caribbean diaspora. We're talking about people who will self-identify as being Caribbean is getting smaller. Sure, the number of mixed heritage in particular with Caribbean extraction is really growing, but the numbers are small. And even so, overall, Black, Caribbean, African, mixed heritage, we're tiny when you compare us to South Asian. So we need allies. We need the people in those positions of power who can open doors and who are willing to give up some of their power in order that we can step into those positions of leadership and authority. Humility and grace. So for me, are closely aligned. So understanding that the need to ask for help, knowing where to get that help, learning from other people, being willing to say, I don't know, and being gracious, in terms of how we treat other people with mercy, even when that's not been afforded to us. At the heart of this, for me, I think, is one of the things that maybe we were not taught very much as children. Certainly, I grew up in a household where, if I was sitting down reading a book, somebody was mum would come along and say, what are you doing? What are you doing sitting down? I'll find you something to do if you haven't got anything to do. And so that bred into me, instilled into me, into many others, that you've got to be constantly busy, constantly on the go. And, when you cried because you were upset, what you're crying for, I'm going to give you something to cry for. So that not learning about self-compassion, how to be compassionate. We can be compassionate for others, but often not for ourselves. And self-care and self-compassion really are, and And all of this stuff is wrapped up in love. That's what it boils down to, you know. The Bible tells us, doesn't it, about that we've got to love our neighbors as ourselves. Well, many of us, not surprising, we don't love our neighbors because we don't love ourselves. We don't treat ourselves well. And that's from a long history, long legacy of being taught how not to do that, or certainly not being taught how to do it. Because sometimes the people who were caring for you didn't know how to do it either. And that means when we come into realization of some of the legacy of that's brought us to this point in our lives, we have to learn to forgive. Because somebody, and I don't know who said it, but it's so true, that unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And unforgiveness will kill your spirit. It's damaging to your mental health. It's damaging to your well-being. Whereas self-care, compassion, taking time out for you, being connected with other people, knowing who you are, knowing what you stand for, all of these things are the things that will help to preserve mental health. And part of that knowing who yourself, I'm just going to finish with this. So this is, for those of you who know, you know. So this is a photograph of the door. Oh, it's now called the door of return, but it used to be called the door of no return at Elmina Castle, and they've called it the door of return because they're actively encouraging people from the diaspora to go back to Ghana and make a contribution or just to come and visit. And for me, one of the defining moments in my life was standing at Elmina and looking at this door. And when you go through, there's a little window actually that you can see the ocean. You go around here, there's like a little slit in the wall, and you can see the ocean. And realizing that some of these people might have been marched, they said that they've been captured. And if they were captured like in the north of Ghana, like Bolgatanga, way, way, way up north, it could be months before they were marched to Elmina on the coast, where they were held in appalling conditions. So many would have died along the journey. Well, many wouldn't have survived the raids on their villages. Then that march on the journeys, many others would have died. And Elmina, they had to wait for the next slave ship to come. Again, many would have died from disease. Some were, particularly the women, were tortured when they refused to submit to the advances of their enslavers. Many died in childbirth because they'd already started that breeding program and so on. And of course, along their passage, many others died, or they were literally thrown over as cargo if the ship was going to be delayed, or if they thought the ship was going to be destroyed. It was easy to get rid of the cargo and claim the insurance when they came back to America or to the UK. And so standing there and recognizing that my ancestors had made that journey across the ocean, so they'd survived all of that. And then, of course, you arrive in the colonies, and Jamaica, where I'm from, was a penal colony. So they would often send slaves from other islands who were renegades, badly behaved, to go to Jamaica because the idea that people were literally going to be worked to death. We were stripped of our names, we were stripped of our identities. We weren't allowed to read and write. So being found able to read and write was punishable by death. And so standing there and recognizing that this is my ancestry, but from that journey, I was able to stand at the University of Manchester earlier this year and be recognized as the first Black woman in their 200-year history. And that to me speaks so much of our resilience as a people and our fortitude and our ability to succeed against the odds. Thank you.
Thank you, Dawn. There is actually so much there to unpack. For me, of course, are male, but we've traveled a similar journey, and there's a lot of what you've said about those early days, things like being in encountering racism, being ordered, that I can identify with, and the weight that actually you then have to carry
Mm,
when you go through all of that, and the fact that not all of us like you, and in fact, not enough of us like you, decide that they're going to lend a helping hand to pull
mm,
others up and to pave the way for others. Our motto is together we can achieve, and I think what you've outlined there really does emphasize the importance of that recognition, that coming together, the networking, um, sharing the load, sharing the burden,
mm,
traveling together, all of that. So I could go on uh, because there's so much of it I could talk about personally, but it's not just about that. And you said you wanted this to be a conversation.
mhm,
Colleagues, I've not been so much keeping a chat on the keeping track of the chat, so I don't know. I've seen lots of comments in there, people wanting to record it and so on and so forth. But do we have anybody who actually want to join the conversation and to um, put your hand up, put on mute, and to engage in conversation? Put some in the chat. Marilyn,
Can,
did you see anything in the chat as yet?
Clive, can I just take the privilege? I'm going to put you. I hope you don't mind, Karen. So Karen is such an advocate and a dear friend. So Karen is a family therapist who has been working with my team around delivering family therapy for people of African and Caribbean descent as part of a research project. And I wondered, Karen, if you just say a little bit about why you think or why you know that family therapy is so important and why and how it can benefit people. So you're on mute, Karen.
So the audio is on. You should have my because
Yeah, can
I'm
hear you now. Yeah, yeah.
okay. I'm in my relaxing clothes, decluttering before coming on here. So I'm a family therapist. I've been working in this field for decades now, and um, one of the things that I think for me that's really important is um, yeah, well, first of all, sorry, thank you very much, Professor Dawn Edge, for the most amazing presentation. First, I want to say that, and
Thank
to
you.
God be the glory.
Amen.
And um, it was just quite phenomenal, really. I sort of make some notes about that. So one of the things I think the importance of having an opportunity for family therapy is because family therapy looks at working across transgenerational histories of families. And of course, there are always these underlying issues in our family systems and communities that we don't talk about. A lot of things are taboo. And it's just great that uh, that not just because of lockdown, but following lockdown, there has been, I feel, um, a more opportunities for people to talk about what can we do to heal some of the troubles within our family systems. Um, and that would be not just young people, older people as well, who have been caught up with whatever's happened across their family generations, and then trying to find some healing and some closure and a way of communicating something differently across generations. So I have felt quite humbled since lockdown, really, to see those things taking place. it is really important if we have the opportunity to be able to look at why we communicate. I think the talking about Professor Edge talking about spending time reading and then having parents saying, "What you doing?" sitting down or whatever, I recognize that very much. And also the gender changes. I know in our own family, we used to go shopping with my dad and then come back and clean out the fridge and clean up the house, and the boys would clean down the doors. They had it sort of very easy, I felt, really. It was and of course, and I don't want to stereotype, but generally from my friends, I know that they used to, the girls used to cook the Saturday dinner and perhaps the Sunday dinner, And I remember my mum saying to me, "Come and stand here by me and watch me cook." And I thought, no way, because I'm doing that as well. So I didn't really learn to cook the West Indian foods until I was much, much older, because like you, Dawn, I was always in my books too. These things about bringing up children and loss. We just had this book, Black Grief and Healing: Why We Need to Talk About Health Inequalities, Trauma and Loss, edited by Yancey Ralston and Patrick Vernon, that came out in September. And I wrote a chapter in that book called Miscarriage, Stillbirth and Infant Loss. And I actually did cite Professor Edge's paper dealing with it, Black Caribbean Women's Response to Adversity and Psychological Distress Associated with Pregnancy, Childbirth and Early Motherhood. Because these are things that people don't talk about. They don't talk about they did just get on with it. And I remember my one of my friends' mothers, when my friend was saying, did you ever have, saying to her mother, did you ever have postnatal depression? Because she had lots of children and it was a struggle being this first generation coming here. And her mother said, "We didn't have time for postnatal depression." We didn't have time
for that.
Yeah. So being able to be able to sort of deconstruct some of these habitual thoughts of, we have to work twice as hard and 3 times as hard and 10 times as hard. It needs to be deconstructed as, we are enough. We are as good as everybody else. And there's something about, I added to what you put here, Dawn, about your values, about the network and allyship, about humanity and grace and self-care and compassion. I added dignity in between the love and forgiveness, because that is really important. We deserve to have dignity and to think about ourselves as being dignified people. And these are also lessons, I think, that we need to be able to teach our children and our grandchildren as well. So these transgenerational conversations about pain and loss, and also working through and how to help our next generations through these experiences, because our experiences, they continue, but how do we get through them, and what we can do to help each other find success, both not just academic, but also just in terms of our own confidence in ourselves and reduction of anxiety and more joy. We need to be able to share those with our generation and community too. Anyway, that's enough.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I've seen someone shared in the chat the book.
Okay, so Elaine Hem has raised her hand.
Hello, yes, it's Elaine. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Elaine.
Oh yeah, thank you for that. It was really, really insightful and good to hear your journey.
Mm,
A couple of things that I wanted to just mention was one was in relation to you. You talked about young people with ADHD and other neurodivergent conditions. And I'm not sure in our community how much we understand or know about these sorts of
mm,
conditions. And that can often cause conflict between children and parents within the family. And then that overspills into school and, other environments. And as you say, leading to mental health issues down the
mm.
line. Because I think sometimes our children feel that nobody's on their side.
Yeah,
But it's
Mm.
often because we don't understand these things ourselves. We don't know what neurodivergency looks like. And I know it varies it massively, but perhaps we, as a Black community, perhaps we need more education in that area because I believe it's more common in our children than we think it is.
yeah,
I think I've
Mm.
been brought up to think this is, we don't have these things like Karen just said. You ain't got time for these problems. You
mm,
got busy getting on with life and whatever. But I do think a lot of our children are misdiagnosed, underdiagnosed,
yeah, yeah,
not getting the support they need
yeah,
from us as family. I mean, the schools and outside is another matter. And we know they don't support
mm,
us well anyway, but we're not able to support our own children either because of our lack of understanding about these conditions.
yeah,
So I think more work around those sort of areas, I
mm,
think would be really, really helpful.
yeah. So I
Thanks.
totally agree, Elaine. Thank you for that. I do think it's not surprising that you'll see um, relatively high rates of diagnosis of kind of the neurodivergent amongst white middle class
Mm.
families
Yeah.
because they know how to access the system to
Hmm.
get the diagnosis and all that that brings. So if you're
Mm.
labeled as neurodivergent, there's a whole host of resources that come your way. Support through school. So even when people come to university, it's remarkable how many people arrive at university and get
Mhm.
diagnosed. They were not dyslexic before, they were not a whole range of other things, but the university, there's a whole system for providing resources, everything from computer software
Mhm.
through extra time for study, extra time in your exams, even to for people at the extreme end, having someone to write things for you in your exam. So there's
Mhm.
a whole load of things. I think you're absolutely right about what doesn't how things are mislabeled or misdiagnosed and things like if you're in a classroom, you're the teacher and you see a child who's looking out the window,
Mhm.
they're not paying any attention.
Yeah.
But actually, for children who may be neurodivergent, if they're getting overloaded, the
Mhm.
breakaway and the looking out the window is one way of giving them some space.
Yeah.
But if you don't know that and then you're on them all the time, and especially if the classroom is noisy, they
Mhm.
need that quieting to come out. And I think that's and then if you're a child and you don't, and you're being treated unfairly,
Mhm.
and then you answer back before you know it, it's escalated into something else, isn't it? And just before I finish, I'll just say so a little while ago now, I received a letter, as an attachment to an email that was sent to me by a prison governor in one of our prisons in Greater Manchester. And this letter was sent by a young man, youngish man, black guy, who was diagnosed very late as being neurodivergent, by which time um, he'd missed loads of school, been excluded, and so on. Ended up in prisons as not uncommonly for children who were excluded from school. It's not uncommon that's where they end up. But given that this man had spent at this point when he wrote to me half of his life in prison and missed so much schooling, this was a beautiful letter. And it made me and still makes me so both sad and angry when you think of what potential he had and still has, and he's still trying. The reason he wrote to me was to say he wanted to use his experience to help other people. And you think, what could he have been? He could have been a professor, whatever his name is. He could have been whatever, because he's clearly a very bright and very able young man. But because his neurodiversity was not picked up as a child, and he ended up missing school, being excluded, and then eventually ended up in the criminal justice system. And it's only by, because I happened to be speaking at a community event, and his mum heard me and when she went to visit him and mentioned what I talked about, and then he got in touch, and the prison officer at the prison has connected us. So I'm trying to do some work into the prisons with him and his contemporaries. But and for every one of those guys, many have lost their lives. Many are lost yo-yoing between the mental health and the criminal justice system, homelessness, all kinds of other stuff. And a lot of that, Elaine, is that we don't understand. And I know that growing up, when my brothers in the 1980s would talk about being stopped and searched by what the police were doing to them, my parents would say, you must have been doing something wrong. When they talked about racism in the classroom, it was, no, you're just not trying hard enough. And what is really sad is that I hear young people now saying exactly the same thing, that their parents are telling them if they're in trouble at school, it's because they're doing something wrong, and not really not seeing how the system is set up to make them fail, and that there are teachers there who are actively seeking to make them fail.
I think also, Dawn, on that one, we tend to think of it as being boys, and I know that it seems to be overrepresented by boys with neurodivergent conditions, but girls as well.
Girls, absolutely.
Girls often get overlooked because they tend to be, as far as I understand it, more high functioning, if you like.
Yeah.
So it's very important that we get to know these things, because it's causing family breakdown between parents and children. And our children not having anywhere else to turn and act out and other behaviours outside of the home. So I hope there's some people on the call who are working in these areas. I'd be happy to support.
Connect. And I think the other thing is as well is that what we've seen is with our families becoming increasingly nuclear, we don't have so many options for other people to help. So, like with psychosis, if in many families, not uncommonly, when a young person, because psychosis, schizophrenia starts typically in middle to late adolescence and early 20s. So that's a time when lots and lots of people are finding themselves, right? in different ways, for good and for ill. And so it's not uncommon that there's a family conflict because people are exerting themselves, and there's that challenge within the family. Now, if you've got a young person in your household who, good student, respectable, reliable, all of those things, and you notice that over a period of time, they are self-isolating, so they're spending more and more time in their room. We're not really talking to the family. They seem not themselves. They might even start drinking, or they start smoking marijuana. The place that most of us will go to, many of us will go to, is my child has gone bad. He's hanging around with the wrong crowd. He's now involved in things that are just, beyond the pale. Sometimes what's happening is that those young people are what's called self-medicating. So they're hearing the voices that other people can't hear. They may be seeing things that other people can't see, or feeling things that other people can't feel. And if they believe that you, the parents, the family, are actually part of the problem, so they may believe that there's a conspiracy to harm them, or that if they speak, the voices are telling them that you, their family, will be harmed, so they can't share with you. If you don't have any insight into that, and these young people might then be staying up, don't sleep for days and days and days and days and days. And so one of the things that will quieten the voices is smoking marijuana. Now, we know there's a paradox, because we also know that there's, particularly with skunk, there's a really strong relationship with psychosis. So that it can actually trigger psychosis. So, but if we're not aware, it's easy to then blame that what we see as bad behavior on being in with the wrong crowd or just going off the rails, and not even considering for a moment that this may be mental ill health. That if you intervened early enough, potentially you could do something about. So it is, again, very, I mentioned that 5% of Black and mixed heritage children in child and adolescent mental health services. And then so there's hardly any. And then you go to the adult mental health services, particularly the forensic end, so the end that involves the police and criminality. And you walk along, you go into one of those wards, and every second person is Black, mixed heritage. So we're not, that goes back to what Elaine is saying, we're not picking up some of these issues in childhood, and then people are then being massively overrepresented at the other end. So.
Okay, that's a great point. Just in relation to that particular point, there's a few points that I'd kind of clarify. Would you do, Dawn? I have a grandson who was diagnosed with autism, and I know it caused some difficulties between mother and father. Just the acceptance of whether or not that was reality or not. I think they've now settled it because the diagnosis has come true, and hopefully it's early enough to ensure that there aren't going to be a problem. I think he's actually one of those high functioning statistics, you might say. But I mean, what do we need? I suppose my question would be, what can we do to try and I suppose educate ourselves around making sure that we actually go through these processes to get these assessments done, so that actually young people can get the right support at the right time to prevent some of the things that clearly has been identified in the chat. That's one point, but I'll let other people come in, and I do have another point, but any thoughts on that?
Me or other people? Because I'm happy for other people to jump in. There are lots of people on here who've got professional experience. No?
Somebody said we need to remove the stigma around being assessed.
Yeah. So there are a couple of things on the assessment. So there is an issue about whether the assessments that we currently have are fit for purpose when it comes to diversity. So a lot of the tools in psychiatry, psychology were actually developed and tested in North America, primarily with college educated, so I mean university educated white male students. So the psychometrics of some of those tools don't necessarily map on to our experiences, but we don't have anything else, and we continue to use them as though they are adequate, and we know that they're not. So I think we need research along the whole pathway. We need some new tools. We need some new treatments. We need the research to underpin those. So this is a real cry from the heart to, for some of you who are on the call, to get actively involved in research, whether it's as research participants or becoming researchers. There are different ways of becoming a researcher. There's somebody on the call who's dropped in the chat that they're a service user researcher. So that's Shireen, and I know that it's possible to. One of my colleagues at the University of Manchester is a service user researcher, and I was privileged to be on the panel this year for appointing chairs, and she became a professor, and she started off hearing voices as a university student and ended up being sectioned and all sorts, and she's now a professor of mental health. So it's having the diagnosis, that's the other thing, as well as removing the stigma. That's quite right. It's telling people that it's not a one-way ticket to oblivion. It is possible to recover, and particularly with psychosis, lots of people have one episode of psychosis, never have any others. But if you don't understand that, then you can end up colluding with the system who wants to label your child as having schizophrenia, where schizophrenia is chronic psychosis. And really, there are people who are in what are called early intervention services, not so many, but people that look like us, who can be there for years. It should be like a holding place where people get family therapy and they get support to enable them to get back into education, to get a foothold in life. But so often what happens with the Black children is that they get labeled as adolescents as having schizophrenia, which should never happen, but it does. So this is where, what's the saying? Knowledge is power. We need to arm ourselves with the knowledge so that we can advocate for better care. And Elaine is chair of a group in Manchester called GADAM, and they provide advocacy for people with mental health conditions, particularly at the severe end, so things like psychosis and bipolar disorder. And anybody on here who's involved with mental health services, all of them should have, anybody that's involved, anybody that's particularly having a serious mental illness, and especially if they're being sectioned, they have a right to mental health advocacy. And there's work that's being done. I'm involved in a project that's looking to make sure that mental health advocacy is culturally informed. So knowledge is power. So arm yourself with the information and the knowledge that you need, and kind of go in and advocate, go to bat for the people in your family and your community.
Thanks very much for that. Marilyn, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, so it's just kind of picking up on what you were saying there. Somebody is asking, is there a Black mental health society who can help parents advocate for their children, or does the onus come down on having a parent who has the knowledge and the confidence to navigate that whole system?
That's a great question. So what there are pockets. So there's not a national that I know of. There's not a national organization that does that. And partly because now our systems are quite fragmented. So we've got a National Health Service in theory, but in practice, with the internal market, we won't go into the politics of that, is that services are independent businesses, right? And so what is available in Greater Manchester is not what's going to be available in Slam or in Southampton or in Newcastle. So knowing what's available means that you have to have that local knowledge, and that's where organisations like the one that Elaine represents are really vital, because they have the knowledge of a local patch plus the knowledge about how to advocate and support people. I think the other thing is that there is an organisation called Black and Asian Therapy Network, BATAN, and they're an organisation that is, as the name says on the tin, of Black and Asian therapists. So that's one place to look for therapists if you're going private. And during the pandemic, there was a group did come together to provide talking treatments. Culturally informed talking treatments, and I don't quite know what's happened to them. So I don't know if anybody else does, because I've not seen or anything or heard anything else for them for quite a while.
Okay.
You mean Black Minds Matter?
No. So there is Black Minds Matter, but this was oh gosh, I'm trying to remember what they were called now. But they were therapists themselves, but what they were doing, they were providing access to therapy free of charge. So there were private practitioners who'd come together to enable people to access therapy, particularly like during the pandemic, where you couldn't get a referral for love nor money, and you certainly couldn't get anything into the NHS.
Okay. Shireen Thompson, you wanted to come in.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I just wanted to say, for the past 25 years, I've been working with families with young people going through the criminal justice system. And one of the things that I've really been trying to advocate for parents is to have where they have concerns about their child maybe having, being on the spectrum or having some kind of special educational need. I always advocate for them to apply for the EHPC, which is the Education, Health and Care Plan, where their child will get the support that they need within the schools. What I have been finding is that a lot of the white middle class parents, they apply for these positions, even when they don't even have concerns for their child, but just because they know of the extra support that their child is going to get whilst in school. And so I'm trying, and then it means that we as Black people, because sometimes we won't even accept the fact that our child may need, additional support, we won't even, consider applying. So I try to encourage parents. I say to them, I'm very open about the fact that I myself am dyslexic. And yes, I did. I found out that I was dyslexic when I was 45 years old, doing my postgraduate at uni. But it was the best thing that happened to me. And I'm sorry sometimes that I didn't find out about it earlier, but I'm just saying again, don't, that stigma of, having that, diagnosis of, autism or, whatever it is. I encourage, parents to please, if you have concerns, speak with your teachers and try to get that plan for your child, your grandchild, because it will make a difference for them, not only in school, in college and in university, but also in the workplace. Because I have my diagnosis from when I was in uni, I now have reasonable adjustments made for me in my employment, now that I'm 60. So I just want to encourage you with that.
Well, thanks ever so much, Shireen. That's brilliant.
Elaine, Emma?
So, yeah, sorry to come in again. I just wanted to mention two other local Black-led organisations. I think you might have meant Support for Progress, Dawn. I'm not sure if that's who you meant.
No, I didn't mention them. No,
earlier,
but yes, there was there. Yeah.
They
Go for
offer
it.
counselling in the community. They're based in the building next door to Westwood Street, which used to be the Mancat Catering College, if people know that. Support for Progress are in there. And as I say, they train people in counselling skills. So if you're interested in becoming a counsellor, you can get training in the community. But they also offer counselling sessions. I'm not sure of costs, etc., but they're a local organisation. And then another organisation that I'm on the board with is an organisation called Fika Welly. Now, Fika Welly, at the moment, we've got a partnership with the African Caribbean Mental Health Group and another CIC. And our part of the programme is to do medicines management. So if people are on mental health drugs currently, and they're not sure whether they're on the correct dosage, or indeed they may be missing out on other drugs to do with their physical health, not just their mental health, they can get a review of their medicines by the Fika Welly group. They're advertising on Legacy Radio as well. So there's a few other options in the community if people need that sort of support. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elaine.
There is another question here.
Yeah.
Oh, actually, it's Zora. I don't know if Zora wants to come on camera, if you want me to read it out. So Zora, if you want to come on camera, let me know. And if not, I will read that out. So if you're around, unmute. I'll give you a few seconds. And if not, I shall read it out. So, okay, Zora might be otherwise engaged. So Zora's saying, how do you feel, Doctor, about prejudice that exists within many teachers? Should it be tackled at the coalface, and should they be disciplined? And should they also undergo further training in terms of diversity? And I know you were saying earlier it's about changing the actual structures rather than the person. But if you could give some comment on that. Oh, Zora, you've unmuted, so you might want to add.
I have. Sorry, I couldn't find the relevant buttons, and I've been to the hairdressers today, so if you don't mind, I'll keep the camera off so I don't frighten everyone off this wonderful phone-in. Yeah, I think, it has been mentioned on a number of occasions, the impact that many Black children have when they express their desires of the kind of occupations they would like to enter into. And the subtle comment from a teacher is often one that knocks their confidence and makes them feel that perhaps they're punching above their weight or it's something that is not achievable. Now, in my view, because I think the impact is so great and it can actually change the course of that individual's life and what they want to achieve. From my point of view, I just wondered whether or not the doctor felt that it was sufficient to be considered as a form of discipline to go through the process of the organisation's disciplinary procedure. Does she think that is a little bit OTT, or could it be dealt with some other way in addition to recommending that individual undergoes further training? I just think up till now I've never really heard the ramifications or the consequence of a teacher giving that poor level of advice being tackled seriously.
Mm. So I guess that really just reinforces a point that we've been talking about, isn't it? About being a systemic and a systems-wide issue. So, if we just think about now, when we talk about different diversity group and protected characteristics. So we have seen how many, I'm sure you've read in the newspapers about teachers being sacked and being outed for not upholding trans rights. So I don't want to turn this into a political anything. I'm just saying.
Yes.
But you can still exclude Black boys from school from having their hair in braids.
Well, my son had that experience, and I had to go to the school to fight on his behalf. And he didn't. He was suspended internally for having his hair cut to, I think they call it grade 1, which is a pretty normal level for a young Black man or young Black boy. But the school felt it bordered on the realms of like a skinhead. And I had to go into the school. In fact, I wasn't even aware he was on internal suspension. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, because the school felt his hair was too low. So what he did as a backlash to that, there was no rule in terms of the length of hair that you could grow your hair. So he grew it. So he eventually did grow his hair to the point where he had very long plaits that looked like dreads, but it was his way of protesting.
But what a burden to carry, right? And and the fact, so this is what I'm saying, it's a systems issue. So how is it that a child is on internal suspension, but his parents don't know?
Well, exactly. And I'm not sort of a shrinking wallflower when it comes to these matters. And he actually, strangely enough, thought that I was causing him more damage than support. He said, Mum, you don't realise how much these teachers have got it in for me because you're going in and fighting my corner.
Yeah.
Well, I thought, well, if I don't fight your corner, who else is? You're only 14, 15.
Yeah.
And if it's the way, if this is your life experience at this stage, you have no idea what's waiting for you down the road. And I'm not going to be here forever. I can't fight your battles when you're a grown man and you are on your way. But for as long as you're a minor and you're in a school environment, educational environment, I have to make sure that you're not being bullied.
Okay.
So I think what we're both saying in the end is that yes, you can, even if it was possible to discipline individual teachers, which most schools aren't going to do, they will always take the side of a teacher over the child. But even if they're going to do that, disciplining an individual teacher will only go so far. because the system has to be there. You know, most of us on here, well, I'm sure would have remembered the story of the reports about Child Q. So when a 15-year-old girl in school is strip searched whilst on her period, head teacher knew, the form teacher, you know, the teachers that took her out of a class knew, all these adults knew. Her parents didn't know because they didn't notify her parents. And they did this illegal, degrading, humiliating thing to this child. Bright girl, GCSE students, and not a disruptive, difficult child. And not that would have justified it. But so, I mean, it's a system issue that this is where we need to use our collective voices. I think absolutely what you're doing, Zora, he won't appreciate it now, but not only will he appreciate it later, but you're also giving him some tools for how he can engage when he becomes a parent, because many of us don't know how to do that. Because we've been badly treated in the system, we almost infantilized by it and almost paralyzed when we have to go to school to go and talk to teachers. We don't necessarily know how to do that and how to challenge the system, which means that we don't go, or when we do go, we don't go in the way that's actually going to be most productive. So again, this is where, you know, we talked about networks and allyship, going to school with somebody else. You know, you are you know, you're articulate, you know how the system works. You may be a teacher yourself, you may have some legal knowledge. Going along with somebody else to support them, just to sit there. You don't have to even to say anything, but sometimes just not being there, especially if you're a lone mother, because you turn up and it's that stereotype, oh, it's another black. Doesn't matter that you might be a high-flying lawyer. You know, the racism in the system will see you as being yet another black lone mother, and therefore not easily dismissed.
So just Raymond, before you come in, just to stick on that same point there for a minute, about the systemic nature of the situation, there, Dawn, because I mean, as a systemic issue, one of the challenge that faces is that we sort of internalize a lot of the negative expectations that systems puts on us. So much so that you'll talk to some of our people who would say, well, racism was yesterday. And actually, up until the recent sort of far-right issues, a lot of us were under this kind of mistaken view that actually that was something that was in the 60s and 70s. And of course, we're now living in a different world. And what a lot of people don't recognize is the kind of enduring impact of the weight of racism that we've had to face. And I kind of suppose my thought is, what are your thoughts about how do we kind of overcome that? How do we, because even some people would not even come into this session because it's about racism, it's about Black people, because they think, well, actually, that's been excluding our white sort of colleagues, and we shouldn't be doing that. So our organization, some people don't want to join because they say, well, we shouldn't be joining this organization because we should all be in this together. What are your thoughts about how we actually overcome any of those challenges? And I recognize it's not an easy question because I don't have an answer.
It's not an easy question.
I
think, and I'm happy for other people to chip in. I think one of the things that we need to understand is that structural racism affects all of us. We all internalize the messages that we see on our TV screens, that we hear on radio, that we've read in books, and we then have to actively do the work to change that. Now, some of us are blessed that we're brought up in households where our families are politically astute and kind of you entering those kind of conversations and debate inside the home. But we're few and far between. Most of us, grew up in families like mine, very ordinary families who of the mindset that if you just keep your head down and work hard, you'll succeed, and really don't understand they can understand the nature of individual racism. So if somebody's going to call you the N-word or discriminate against in another open way, but struggle to understand systemic racism, structural, baked into society racism. And therefore, you can see how then they internalize those messages. But if you're not succeeding in school, despite trying your hardest, if your child is not succeeding in school, it can't be. And the teachers are nice. You go to parents' evening, and the teachers are lovely. I remember one of the children in our family, going to a meeting about this little girl, and the teacher said, "Oh, she's a ray of sunshine." I'm thinking, well, what grade is she going to get for that? She's not sent to school to be the entertainment. She's not supposed to bring joy, and okay, that's lovely, and I'm really glad to hear that she's a full citizen in the school and she's contributing. Okay, now can we talk about a maths and a English and a science, please?
Okay. But I know Marilyn and Pauline wanted to come in. Raymond was going to come in earlier. Raymond, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, the question I wanted to ask is a simple one. With Charles Pugh, what did the governors do about what happened? And were the governors held to account? And were there any black governors in that school? Because for my money, if parents do not engage with the school at the highest level, i.e. sitting on the governing board, then they are actually allowing their children to be subject to the institutional racism that is within the school system. And I, British-born Jamaican, I've been here for 70 years. And in the 60s and 70s, that racism was self-evident. And the funny thing is, today I was just coming across the zebra crossing, and there was a little black boy and a little white boy, and they were walking together like friends. And the little white boy started calling the little black boy a nigger. And I was very taken aback by it. But it was almost as if it was a friendly nickname that he was giving him, even though I found it offensive. The little black boy did not seem to take offense at it, So
no. So what's I'm saying about how racism is internalized and normalized by so many. And if that child already is not hearing that as offensive, well, but to be fair, he's probably grown up listening to music where that word is used all the time, and people, and maybe around people who use it to just talk to each other in a way that's kind of friendly banter and it's not seen as being negative. So I don't know, but I think you made the point about how we can influence systems. And so I've been a school governor, and I think it was Paulina who wrote in the chat about going into school to work as an assistant. And you can go in, you can volunteer to go in and listen to children read, or there are lots and lots of ways that we can be more present. Some of us who maybe work part-time or maybe retired or semi-retired can give a bit, a couple of sessions to go in and do that. Being on the governing on the board of governors, I think absolutely can be a game changer. And I know people who've gone in on the board of governors and absolutely transformed the way schools deal with Black and other minoritized families because they've been there. But we need to see that. We need to, we've got so many people in our community now who would, what would be called, kind of middle class, professional, whatever. And whereas, in the United States, there has been a tradition of philanthropy, of people giving back and using that politically to, the National Association of Advancement of Colored People has been going a long, long time. And a lot of those people kind of strategically place themselves in positions of power and influence. And you see in, I don't know wherever, I know we come from a range of different communities, but you watch particularly Pakistani and Bangladeshi people do this. They are really good. You look at, I don't know where you live, but in Manchester, you look at the number of black councillors, and you look at the number of, they be called South Asian councillors, but actually the majority of them are Pakistani and Bangladeshi.
Yeah.
And what they're doing is they're using those positions to leverage all kinds of systems to influence the system, whether it's education, access to healthcare, a whole range of different things. And we don't do that so much.
I think they do it in Luton. They do it in Luton too. I think, which is where I think Raymond is from. Can I just pick on something up before Raymond comes back in, which is really this systemic issue. I have to say, go way beyond the 60s and 70s. And an indication of that is I hadn't realized that racism existed in the Caribbean until I came here and started reflecting back. And some of the ways we've internalized things, like the way we literally self-abused ourselves. Like, for example, you go to a girl's house and you look like me, and parents who look like me say, where bring that black boy come from? And that kind of thing. That and actually, some of it still goes on now.
No.
And we kind of think that, oh, well, that's just not it. It's just little bantering or what goes on. That's the way in which we internalize these negativity, and it undermines our self. And that is something that we need to combat. And that's why it makes it very difficult for us to really kind of gel together in the way that we need to begin to fulfill the promise. Because actually, one of the things that we were talking about last week was the fact that the narratives that there is around some of these things has written all the positives out of our experiences, out of what's going on. And much of what is positive in the world came out of our experiences, you know. However, I know there's some. Raymond, do you want to come back in? Because I know Marilyn, Pauline, and Christiana are waiting.
I'll let them speak. Okay.
Yeah, and just before they go, so I just noticed Elaine just popped in the chat about good hair. I was going to mention good hair, a straight nose, high color, and you know there's a reason why many of us, not just in this country but in Africa, in the Caribbean, are bleaching. You go there, and some people are like vampires. They only come out at night.
Absolutely. Marilyn first.
Okay, now this was a quick question, a slight change of tack, and it might not be very popular, but hey, here we go. So I've been a coach and therapist for the last 24 years. And one of the things I noticed when I got started was that there was a big, how can we say, disconnect between people who had a religious faith. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the idea of praying on something versus actually seeing a therapist, getting therapy, because conversations I then had about 15 or so years later, people were in pretty bad shape, having really not taken any steps, taken any actions, because therapy was seen almost a bit like my mum would say, what you're doing walking with your two long hands. That was almost seen as a defeatist way. You should be able to pull your socks up, sort yourself out, pray on it. So I'd just love to hear your thoughts around that kind of side of the conversation.
So interesting. I was listening to something recently about the Negro Bible. So the Negro Bible, that and it was a thing. It was a Negro Bible that slave owners used to reinforce doctrine about, you know, being submissive and so on and so on and so on. And we've also internalized, again, that thing about particularly women, strong Black women. So we're strong Black women, and because we're strong. And I hear people saying to all the time, you know, somebody's just lost a parent, and people saying to them, be strong, you know, praying for you. I'm thinking, yeah, well, you know, be strong, pray for me, but I'm in a mess. Come round and help me clean the house or do a little something, do you know? So I do think that this is a falling back on prayer. And I'm a born again Christian. I'm absolutely there about prayer. But there is nowhere in the Bible that it tells you that you shouldn't get medical help. Nowhere. Jesus himself said, you know, it's the sick people that need a doctor, not those who are healthy. So he didn't dismiss healers. He didn't miss people. We've taken that on board, and it doesn't have to be faith or medicine, psychology, whatever. You can actually, there actually are Christian counselors. There are Christian therapists who will work with you in with your mental health difficulties, emotional difficulties, and do it from a biblical perspective. They will use scripture to help you to understand what you're experiencing and to put it in context. You know, lots of people in my family who were not Christians, not saved, but they can quote a Psalms because so much of what's in the Psalm is really real. You know, it talks about why art thou cast down, O my soul. The man talks about being in the pit. There are lots and lots that's the reason why people love the Psalms, because they speak of the human experience. And I think we in churches we have done people a disservice by telling them just to pray it away, and rather than get the help they need. We wouldn't tell someone to pray away cancer, or to pray away diabetes, or to pray away multiple sclerosis. So why would you tell them to pray away depression, to pray away psychosis? It's yeah. So, it's a rhetorical question.
Okay. Paulina.
Greetings. Yes, with how I see it as well is with us as parents ourselves, we have our healing to do as well, because when we're working, because I used to work for the National Health Service, and as soon as I got the job, the first thing the woman said to me, "Oh, does black people bleed red blood?" And I had to look at the woman, this big woman, it's supposed to be my manager, asking me that question. And, you know, all the attacks I had to put up with from her. And plus deal with my son at school, with his teacher, you know, and my daughter, because, you know, I was quite active with the headmaster, you know, showing them, you know, you're not going to take advantage of my child like that. And, you know, it with all these, plus I'll put the extra in as well, which I don't know if others would put in, plus a partner who is not giving the support that's needed. So as a woman, we have so much on our shoulder bearing. And you don't know what the child is picking up from that as well, the essence of what you're going through.
Yeah.
Because I know my daughter has picked up something from it, and it's a negative, where the two boys, they've picked up more positive. Because I had the boys at, I had my daughter young, but I had the boys at 32 and 42. So there was more, I was a bit more firm and steady at those ages. But still, there's a lot as women we have to carry on our shoulders to go through with. And that child, you know, I think it has a little bit of an impact on them, even though you're defending them in the school. Because the saying my father always used to say to me, even if you're not with your partner, just ask him to come to the school with you, because when there's a united front between you and them, the teacher won't take so much advantage of your child. But, you know, not all partners, you know, got the time or probably
the
can
inclination.
Yeah, I yield.
Yeah. So I do think there is something about us now needing, whatever stage of life you're at, is to take the time to look at where you're at and get the therapy. You know, it's never too late. And when you do the work of self-healing, you're in a better position to help other people. So last week I was in Sweden, and I now never get on an airplane without this coming back to me. A few years ago, my mum had died actually, and I was traveling to Jamaica, and there was lots of other stuff going on. And after all these years I've been traveling on a plane, but on that time when the stewardess did the safety thing, I heard as if for the first time when she said, if there's a sudden loss in cabin pressure, the mask will fall from the ceiling, blah, 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 blah. First, fit your own mask. First, fit your own mask. Before you even put the mask on the baby on your lap, fit your own, because if you're not able to breathe, you can't help anybody else to stay alive. And I think many of us are suffocating, have died inside, not that we're not able to be revived with the right kind of help, but we're not in a good position to be able to help anybody else. So I do think that first fit your own mask. And I don't mean the mask that some of us wear, where we are, in church and we are, praise the Lord, all is well. We're hiding behind a mask of faith, of strong Black women, of all these, lots of other things. Put on the mask from which you're going to be able to draw the very breath of life.
As I know Marilyn has put in the chat, there's much to explore. I'm conscious that we've only got 10 more minutes as we've established for this meeting. So maybe I can ask if those who do want to ask questions can make their questions brief or their comments brief so that we can hear from as many more people as we can. Because when we set a time, we certainly don't want to go over without due care and attention for people who may have other things that they want to do. So, Christiana.
Okay, I'll be as brief as possible, but I'd like to say this gathering has been very beneficial for me as a professional mental health specialist, and also for something we are experiencing in my family at the moment. Mm. And that is where I want to move the conversation on to what help we are giving our young adults in the workplace who are experiencing discrimination in their professional careers. I am working through that situation in my family at the moment. And I am one who has had the conversation from when they were children, and we are still having that conversation. We've had a weekend of what we call our family therapy to support this young professional. I hate to call her a child, but she is my child. And we've had the family therapy with her brother and the family. We've had to travel to Cambridge to be together to support her. But I can see a young professional woman drowning because of work. I'll use the word work bullying. Mm. And it's related to her race. When somebody has taken negatively to her because she was able to challenge, when they said in their culture, and you're talking to a British girl born in our area in St. Albans, and you are talking to her that in a way that she felt she didn't belong to the society. And because of that, now I'm having to deal and keep an eye on a young lady who is showing severe signs of depression. Where do we go to support our young people in the workplace to grow?
So I think, Christiana, you're doing a great job. I think, what you were saying about having a family that comes together and supports somebody to say that we're with you. Yeah. That is great.
Yeah. Can I
because,
sorry.
I was just going to say, because the reality is that many of us, we're not going to get it in the workplace. So when we, I think one of the things that white and to a lesser extent, because even when Asian and Jewish people and Chinese people, when they experience discrimination, it's a different thing. So I'm with Diane Abbott. Let me say out loud, I'm with her. We all face discrimination, but there's a whole other thing when it's Black people. So I'm just saying so. And so in the workplace, we're not necessarily going to get the support we need. In fact, we know, as you say, we might get quite the opposite. But if we can come together as families and communities and support each other, that's our place of healing. Many of us, particularly in the early days of what we now call Black majority churches, that's what they were. They weren't just places of religion and spirituality. They were places of healing, and they're supposed to be places of healing. That's what the Bible says, isn't it? Christ came to heal, not just to save souls. And we saw that all through his ministry, that he was laying hands on people and healing them. And just saying to somebody, I am here. Sometimes there's nothing else you can say. There's nothing else you can do, but just being there, letting them know that they're not alone and giving them permission to cry, to be angry, to be hurt. And occasionally we might have to just encourage them to step away, whether that's to step away on sick leave or whether that's actually to step away from a job that's making them ill and do something else, even if it's something that they, the role that they're in is something that they love. If God forbid, you were not able to go back into that job, they'll soon find somebody else to replace you. But you're irreplaceable to the people who really love and care about you. And those are the conversations we need to have with people. And sometimes just give them the permission to say, I'm out of here.
Just to say, Dawn, you mentioned earlier on about networking, and in the workplace, as I used to do a bit of this work in another life, one of the issues, though, is that we do also need to support people who are struggling, even though we're not struggling ourselves. Because, as the saying goes, if you're not there for other people, can you see a situation where other people are going to be there for you? Because if they're all gone, then they're not going to be there for you. So one of the difficult, sometimes we take a view, not talking about your relative at all, that for example, when you have a Black staff network or whatever you might call it, oh, well, I don't have a problem, so I don't need to get involved in that. And of course, it then doesn't offer the support that it could do because we're not there to share the load. And I think that's one of the things that we can all do better. So support each other. Don't wait until we need support to look at what we do with it. Janet, I think wanted to come in because I'm also conscious of time. Time is not an issue for us, but I know Dawn may have other things she'll want to do. So Janet, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, mine is just a very quick comment to the lady that was asking Dawn a question about Christianity and counselling. And I just wanted to quickly share that I think the tide is turning, personally from my own personal experience. As somebody who's grown up in the church and is an active Christian, I found myself in a very difficult situation in work where I'd been sacked because of racial harassment. And then I also had a few personal family problems. And I just felt that I wasn't getting well. And I spoke to a Christian counsellor who helped us to understand that we are physical, spiritual, and we have our soul, which is our minds, our feelings. And, when we are ill in our souls, the only thing that really effectively works is counselling. So it is, I think the tide is changing in Christianity, that we have a holistic approach, that, we have the counselling, we also eat well and exercise, and also we pray. So I just wanted to say that, and I'm a lot better now because I did have a number of months counselling. So yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Sister Janet, and safe travels to Ghana tomorrow.
Thank you.
Indeed. Okay, so I think we're at a point where I can't see any new hands that are there. And actually, the hour is nearly up. So first of all, can I just ask you, Dawn, having kind of made your presentation, heard what you've heard, are there any takeaways you'd like to leave with people tonight?
I think, the major one I'd like to say is that somebody once said to me, I think we're in a group of people, you can be ill by yourself, but you can't be well by yourself. Yeah. So we need to be connected, and we need to get the support when we need it. And I think what you were alluding to, Clive, is that you need to build those networks beforehand. It's like making sure that you have that support network. And I know that generally speaking, not always, women tend to be a bit better about talking about their feelings and than the men. But again, there are lots of organizations who are doing more to encourage men to talk about their feelings. Sometimes, I don't know how many of us will go to pubs, but sometimes there are some mental health organizations, like one that I was involved in, and they would have beer mats with mental health messages and a contact number if you needed help and support. Some of the football clubs are doing stuff around mental and physical health. So I would just say that this is not a journey that you're intended to take by yourself. Get the help and support and guidance that you need. And I think Sister Janet hit the nail on the head. We are body, soul, mind, spirit, and we need to take care of all of those things. There's an inextricable link between mood and food. So things that you eat can actually enhance or suppress your mood. Exercise doesn't have to be running. Just walking in nature or cycling, or if you're in a wheelchair, going out and about and just getting fresh air and moving. And if you can do it with somebody else with you and talk while you do that, all the better. Or meditate. I love meditating in nature. So yeah, remember, body, soul, mind, and spirit, and you can't be well by yourself.
Absolutely. Can I just say to people, I know many of you got your cameras off, but if you've appreciated and valued the session that we've had this evening, you might want to put your cameras on and just acknowledge the value of tonight's achievement by giving Dawn a clap. But if not, you can give her a virtual one.
A virtual clap is absolutely fine. Thank you, everyone, and thank you so much for engaging with the conversation. I knew you would. And I'm really, really delighted to have heard people sharing their views and dropping things into the chat. I'm sure a lot of that will be really edifying for other people. So thank you so much. And thank you, Clive. Thank you, Clive, for inviting me. And yeah, it's a great work that you and the team are doing. Thank you, Marilyn. Thank you, Marcia, and others.
Thank you.
It has been a long time coming. We got there in the end. And hopefully, can I just say that clearly Marilyn put something in the chat earlier to say that there's more that we can more to explore around this issue. If there are any particular issues that you would want us to do a bit more on, please put some in the chat. And if you're one of those people who may have arrived later and would like the recording of this, then do also put that information in the chat. For me, I want to thank Dawn. I think it's been worth the wait. I'm sure Marcia would agree with me because I think we met her for the first time together a little while back. I also kind of need to thank our Black History Planning Group, some of whom are on here tonight. Jamu has done a lot of the work publicizing this and other events. Most of all, though, I want to thank all of you because actually, I have to say, I don't think we've ever had a more vibrant meeting with a level of engagement that we've got, even though people have still got their microphones on. But as I said earlier on, we welcome any comments that you have in relation to tonight. If you've missed it, you can also comment to us at hello@waka.org.uk. I should also say, and I'm just going to put it in the chat, we have a community needs assessment that we are trying to get people to complete, because what we want to do is make sure that the work that we do reflects the needs of our people, because together we can achieve, and we can only do it with your thoughts. I've just put that in the chat now. So please, if you haven't done so already, ask your family members to do that, because we need many more people to complete that. I know Marilyn is ready to put in the chat some stuff about our Black History Month program. The final thing I want to mention is that on the 16th of next month, we're having a gala ball. We're a charity and we need to raise money. It is going to be about the best gala ball you're likely to participate in. Unfortunately, it isn't free because we're trying to raise money. So if you haven't got a ticket as yet and want to buy one, all the details are also on our website. I think what I'm going to try and do conclude the session, and just to repeat. Dawn, I think, has raised a number of points tonight that certainly resonate with me, and I hope it all resonates with you. There are points that we are really going to need to think about seriously as individuals and within our organizations, so that as a community particularly of African people, we are actually going to step up. We're going to support each other. We're going to put. I have this idea that people have heard me talk about, which is the pull up and the push up. When we're up there, we're going to pull people up. When we're down there, we're going to push those up that needs to go up, and we just need to do that together. And as we say within the organization, together we can achieve. And I say together we can achieve more. So I can't thank Dawn enough for tonight. And depending on what people say, I hope that we'll be able to engage with you again. And I hope you'll see, just by the engagement and reaction of people, the extent to which people valued your contribution tonight. Nobody more so than myself. So that is it. Thank you all.